In the year 1781, during the final years of the American Revolutionary War, one ship set sail from France with a mission no one thought possible. It was not a shiny new warship built in some grand navy yard. No, it was old, worn, and had seen better days. Its name was Bonhomme Richard, and it looked more like a ghost from the past than a fighting ship ready for battle. The Bonhomme Richard had once been a French merchant ship called Duc de Duras, but now it had been turned into a warship for the American cause. It was slow, heavy, and filled with holes from years of use. Still, it had one thing that mattered most: a commander who believed in its power. That commander was John Paul Jones. A captain like no other, John Paul Jones was not born an American, but he became one of the greatest heroes of the American Navy. He was born in Scotland in 1747 and grew up near the sea. From a young age, he dreamed of sailing far away, exploring the world and commanding ships. He started as a cabin boy on a merchant ship and worked his way up to become a captain by the time he was only 21. He was known for being brave, smart, and never backing down from a fight. When the American Revolution broke out, Jones sided with the Americans. He believed in their fight for freedom and wanted to help them defeat the powerful British Navy. Jones sailed to France, where the Americans were asking for help. France had already agreed to support the American Revolution after the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. So, with French support, Jones was given command of the Bonhomme Richard and told to take it to sea. A crew of misfits, the crew of the Bonhomme Richard was unlike any other. It was made up of men from many different places and backgrounds. There were Americans, of course, but also French volunteers, Dutch sailors, and even some former pirates. They didn't all speak the same language, and they certainly didn't always agree, but what they did share was a love for adventure and a desire to fight against the mighty British Empire. Many of them had nothing to lose. Some had been poor farmers, others had been prisoners hoping to escape punishment, and some just wanted gold and glory. Jones knew that leading such a mixed group would be hard, but he also knew that if he could bring them together under one flag, they could do something great. Life on a warship like the Bonhomme Richard was tough. The ship was crowded, noisy, and often smelled bad. There were no soft beds, no clean clothes, and very little privacy. Sailors slept in hammocks tied between the guns, and they ate simple food like salted meat, hardtack, a kind of dry biscuit, and whatever fresh fish they could catch. There were rules on board, and Jones made sure everyone followed them. He was strict but fair. He punished laziness and disobedience, but he also rewarded bravery and hard work. His goal was to turn this ragtag group of men into a real fighting force. Each sailor had a job to do. Some climbed high into the mast to adjust the sails. Others kept the decks clean and repaired broken parts of the ship. Gunners trained every day, learning how to load and fire the cannons quickly and accurately. Jones himself walked the deck, constantly, watching everything, talking to his men, and preparing them for what lay ahead. A dangerous mission, the mission Jones had been given, was bold, maybe even crazy. He was to take his small fleet of ships and attack British merchant ships along the coast of Britain itself. That meant sailing right into enemy waters, where British warships were everywhere. Most people thought this was suicide. The British Navy was the strongest in the world. Their ships were faster, newer, and better armed. The Americans, on the other hand, were still a young country with no real navy to speak of. But Jones didn't care about the odds. He believed that courage, surprise, and skill could beat even the biggest fleet. He also knew that if he could strike fear into the hearts of the British people, it might help the American cause back home. So, with the Bonhomme Richard at the front, Jones led his small fleet out to sea. Behind them, France watched closely. In America, people waited anxiously for news. And in Britain, no one expected trouble to come so close to home. Sailing into history, as the Bonhomme Richard cut through the waves, the sun rose behind it, casting long shadows over the ocean. The ship was slow and heavy, but it moved forward, with purpose. Its wooden hull creaked with every wave, and the American flag flew proudly at the top of the mainmast. Below deck, the smell of gunpowder and sweat filled the air. The cannons stood ready and the men whispered among themselves. Some were excited, others were scared, but all of them knew they were part of something big. They were going to face the British Navy, not in open battlefields or distant colonies, but right at Britain's doorstep. And the man leading them was a fearless captain who believed that one ship, one crew, and one idea could change the course of history. No one knew what awaited them beyond the horizon. But one thing was clear. The Bonhomme Richard was not just a ship anymore. It was a symbol of hope, defiance, and the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to dream of freedom. And soon, the whole world would know its name. The Bonhomme Richard had been sailing for weeks now. The wind filled its sails, the sea rocked it gently from side to side, and the crew worked hard every day to keep the old ship moving forward. Captain John Paul Jones stood on the deck most mornings, looking out over the waves with sharp eyes, always searching. They were getting closer to their target, the busy waters off the eastern coast of Britain. This was where British merchant ships traveled in large groups carrying goods like food, cloth, and weapons. These ships were the lifeblood of Britain's war effort, and if they could be stopped, it would hurt the British badly. But these merchant ships didn't sail alone. They were always protected by powerful warships, fast, heavily armed British frigates that patrolled the seas like wolves guarding a flock of sheep. Jones knew the danger. He also knew this was his chance to strike a blow that would echo across oceans. The fog rolls in it was early one morning when the fog came rolling in from the sea like a thick gray blanket. The sky turned pale, the horizon disappeared, and the world seemed to shrink to just the sound of waves and the creaking of wood. Visibility dropped to only a few hundred feet. The Bonhomme Richard and its small fleet moved slowly through the mist, like ghosts. The men whispered as they worked, unsure of what lay ahead. Then, just after sunrise, a lookout shouted from high above, "Sails on the horizon!" All heads turned upward. Through the thinning fog, several ships could be seen, not far away. And as the mist lifted more, the truth became clear. It wasn't just a few merchant ships. It was a whole convoy. And it was guarded by a powerful British warship, the HMS Serapis. The enemy revealed, the Serapis was everything the Bonhomme Richard was not. It was newer, faster, and built for battle. Its cannons were bigger, its hull stronger, and its crew well-trained. The Serapis was commanded by Captain Richard Pearson, a seasoned British officer who had spent years defending British trade routes. Alongside the Serapis were other British ships, smaller escorts, and many merchant vessels filled with supplies. This was no ordinary convoy. It was huge. And now the Bonhomme Richard had found it. The American sailors grew quiet as they stared at the enemy ships. Some looked nervous. Others looked scared. They were badly outnumbered. Most of them had never faced such a strong force before. Jones, however, stood tall. He looked at the British fleet without fear. He knew what he had to do. The decision to fight. Jones gathered his officers below deck. They talked in low voices, weighing their options. Some argued they should run. The British fleet was too strong. Fighting would be suicide. Others said they had come all this way to fight. If they ran now, what was the point? Jones listened carefully. Then he spoke. "We did not come here to hide," he said. "We came to fight. We came to show the world that the American Navy can stand up to the British." His voice was calm, but firm. His eyes showed no doubt. "Prepare for battle," he ordered. The decision was made. Battle plans back on deck, the mood changed. The fear that had crept into the hearts of the men was replaced by action. Orders were shouted, sails were adjusted, cannons were checked, gunpowder was brought up from the hold. Jones gave clear instructions to the other American ships in his Fleet. There was the Alliance, a French warship, and several smaller vessels like the Pallas and Vengeance. Each had a role to play. The plan was simple: distract the escorts, attack the Serapis, and try to capture the merchant ships. Jones knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that courage and surprise could turn the tide. As the Bonhomme Richard moved closer to the British fleet, the sun broke through the clouds. The sea sparkled like glass, and the two fleets were now clearly visible to each other. There was no turning back. The mocking challenge: the British had spotted the Americans and began preparing for battle. As the Serapis closed the distance, Captain Pearson sent a signal asking the Bonhomme Richard who it was. Jones answered proudly, "The United States of America." Pearson then called out mockingly from his ship, "Do you surrender?" Jones looked at him with fire in his eyes and shouted back, "I have not yet begun to fight." Those words echoed across the water. The American crew cheered. The British, stunned by the boldness, prepared for battle. The first shots. Suddenly, cannon fire roared from both sides. Smoke filled the air. The sea exploded with noise and fire. The Serapis fired first, aiming straight at the Bonhomme Richard. Heavy British guns hit their mark. Wood splintered. Men cried out. Blood spilled onto the deck. But Jones kept his cool. He ordered the Bonhomme Richard to move closer. He wanted to get so close to the Serapis that the British couldn't use all their cannons without risking hitting their own ship. It was a risky move, but it might work. The Bonhomme Richard tried to pull alongside the Serapis, but something went wrong. The ship got tangled in the ropes of another British vessel, the Countess of Scarborough, and couldn't move freely. Now the Bonhomme Richard was stuck between two enemies. Chaos and courage. The battle quickly turned into chaos. Gunners on both sides fired as fast as they could. The decks were covered in smoke and blood. Shrapnel flew everywhere. Screams mixed with the sounds of battle. Jones fought from the quarterdeck, giving orders even as bullets flew past his head. The American gun crews was doing terrible work. Their cannon kept jamming. Jones stormed down to help them himself. "I'll help you load this gun," he shouted over the noise. With his own hands, he helped load and fire the cannon, showing his men that even the captain was ready to fight, like a common sailor. Meanwhile, the Alliance and the French ship was supposed to help. But instead of attacking the Serapis, it started firing at the Bonhomme Richard by mistake. More damage, more confusion, more danger. Jones shouted at the Alliance to stop, but the ship kept firing. Only later would it join the real fight. Hope fades, but not courage. By now, the Bonhomme Richard was taking serious damage. Fires had broken out below deck. Water was leaking in. Many of the cannons were destroyed. Dozens of men were dead or wounded. Captain Pearson, seeing the state of the American ship, thought the battle was over. He called out again, "Have you struck your flag?" That meant, "Have you surrendered?" For a moment, silence. Then Jones shouted back louder than ever, "I have not yet begun to fight." Those words gave the crew new strength. Even though things looked hopeless, they kept fighting, because their captain hadn't given up and neither would they. The turning point. Just when it seemed like the Bonhomme Richard would be destroyed, something unexpected happened aboard. The Serapis, a small American grenade thrown by a sailor named David Chevalier, landed on the British deck. It rolled under the main cannon and exploded. The explosion killed the gun crew and set fire to powder bags nearby. Chaos erupted on the Serapis. Jones saw his chance. "Board her!" he shouted. American sailors climbed aboard the Serapis, swords in hand, ready to fight hand to hand. The battle had become a brutal, bloody fight across the decks of both ships, and now the tide was beginning to turn. The battle between the Bonhomme Richard and the HMS Serapis had turned into a nightmare. Smoke filled the air. Flames licked at the wooden decks. Gunpowder exploded with loud bangs. Men shouted, screamed, and fell. Blood ran across the planks. Like water after a storm. The two ships were locked together, their masts tangled, their sides touching. It was no longer a naval battle. It was a fight to the death. A ship on fire below deck, the Bonhomme Richard, was burning. A fire had started near the powder room when a British cannonball smashed through the hull and hit a barrel of gunpowder. Sparks flew everywhere, and soon flames began to spread. Sailors rushed to put out the fire, but it was hard work. Smoke made it hard to breathe. Heat made it hard to move. Water buckets passed from hand to hand, but there weren't enough men to keep up. Captain John Paul Jones knew that if the fire reached the main powder magazine, the whole ship would explode. Still, he stayed calm. He shouted orders from the quarterdeck. He moved from one part of the ship to another, checking on his men, giving them strength just by being there. "Keep fighting," he yelled over the noise. "We are not beaten yet." His voice gave hope to the crew. They fought harder. "I have not yet begun to fight." On the upper deck, chaos reigned. British sailors tried to board the Bonhomme Richard. American sailors pushed them back. Swords clashed. Pistols fired. Men fell into the sea. Captain Pearson of the Serapis thought the American ship was finished. He called out again, hoping to end the fight. "Have you struck your colors?" he asked. That meant, "Have you surrendered?" For a moment there was silence. Then from the smoke and fire came a loud, clear voice. "I have not yet begun to fight." It was John Paul Jones. Those words echoed across the battlefield. The Americans cheered, even though their ship was broken, even though they were bleeding and burned. They kept fighting, because their captain hadn't given up, and neither would they. Grappling hooks and boarding parties, Jones saw an opening. The Serapis was close enough now. He ordered his men to throw grappling hooks onto the British ship. Ropes tightened. The two ships were pulled even closer. "Board her!" Jones shouted. With wild cries, American sailors climbed onto the Serapis. Some used ropes, others jumped across. They carried swords, pistols, knives, and anything else they could find. The British were shocked. They had expected the Bonhomme Richard to surrender. Instead, they were being attacked. Hand-to-hand combat broke out on the Serapis A's. Deck Americans and British soldiers swung at each other with everything they had. Blood sprayed. Men fell. Screams mixed with the sound of cannon fire. One American sailor named John Mayrant led a group straight toward the British gun crews. They fought fiercely, trying to stop the cannons from firing. Another sailor, David Chevalier, threw a grenade onto the Serapis's deck. It landed near the main cannon and exploded, killing several British gunners and setting fire to nearby powder bags. Chaos spread. Jones took advantage. He called for more men to join the attack. The tide of the battle was starting to turn. Kither, turning point on the Serapis, Captain Pearson realized something was wrong. His cannons were silent. His gun crews were dead or wounded. Fires were spreading. And worst of all, the Americans were taking over his ship. He looked around for help, but none came. The Alliance, the French warship that was supposed to be helping the Americans, had been firing at the Bonhomme Richard earlier by mistake. Now it was finally attacking the Serapis, but slowly. Pearson shouted orders, but his men were confused. They couldn't reload the guns fast enough. They couldn't stop the Americans from climbing aboard. Then something happened that changed everything. One of the Serapis' cannons jammed. A British gunner tried to fix it, but it wouldn't fire. Another cannon misfired and blew up in his face. More Americans poured onto the deck. Pearson saw that his ship was losing control. He raised his sword and shouted to his men, "Stand firm! Stand firm!" But his voice was drowned out by the sounds of battle. "Surrender!" Suddenly, a cry went up from the Serapis' lower deck. "We're sinking." Water was pouring in through holes made by cannon fire. The ship was taking on too much water. If it didn't stop soon, it would go down. At the same time, the Americans had taken over most of the upper deck. Captain Pearson looked around. There was no way to win. He lowered his sword. Then, in a loud voice, he said the words that ended the battle. "I surrender." Silence fell over both ships. The HMS Serapis had given up. The Bonhomme Richard had won. Victory at a cost. The Americans cheered. Some laughed, some cried, some just stood still, unable to believe what had just happened. They had faced impossible odds, they had fought the strongest navy in the world, and they had won, but victory came at a terrible price. The Bonhomme Richard was badly damaged. Fires still burned below deck. Holes in the hull let in seawater. Many of its cannons were destroyed. Dozens of American sailors were dead or wounded. The decks were covered in blood. Jones walked through the wreckage, looking at his brave men. "You did it," he said quietly. "You fought like lions, but there was no time to rest. The Bonhomme Richard was dying." Saving what was left, Jones gave new orders. "Get everyone off the Bonhomme Richard," he said. "Move to the Serapis and the other ships." The surviving crew obeyed. They carried the wounded first. Then the healthy men followed. Slowly, the old warship emptied. As the last men left, they looked back at the Bonhomme Richard. It sat low in the water. Its sails hung in tatters. Its masts were broken. Smoke rose from deep inside. By morning, it would be gone. A new flag flies, high on the Serapis. The American flag now flew where the British flag once had. It was a powerful sight. An American captain had captured a British warship in British waters. No one had believed it could happen, but it had. Word of the battle would soon reach France. It would reach America, and it would shock Britain. John Paul Jones had proven that the American Navy could fight, that one ship, one crew, and one idea could change history. And as the sun rose over the ocean, the Serapis sailed away, carrying the heroes of a battle that would never be forgotten. The battle was over. The HMS Serapis had surrendered. The British flag came down, and the American flag flew proudly where it once did. But even as the Americans celebrated their victory, another truth became clear. The Bonhomme Richard was exterior. A sinking giant, even before the final shots were fired, the Bonhomme Richard had been badly damaged. Now, with the fight over, Captain John Paul Jones walked through the wreckage of his ship. Smoke still rose from below deck. Fires had mostly been put out, but the smell of gunpowder and burnt wood filled the air. Water poured in through holes, made by British cannonballs. Jones knew the ship could not last much longer. He ordered his men to move quickly. "Get everything we can off the ship," he said. "We must save what we can." Sailors rushed to carry supplies, weapons, and wounded men onto the captured Serapis and other American ships like the Pallas and Alliance. The Bonhomme Richard had fought hard, but now it would soon rest at the bottom of the sea. As the last of the crew left the old warship, they looked back one last time. Its masts leaned at strange angles. Its hull was cracked and broken. The MI, American flag, still flew from the stern, but it fluttered weakly in the wind. By morning, the Bonhomme Richard was gone. It sank beneath the waves, disappearing into the dark ocean. A bitter goodbye. For many sailors, the loss of the Bonhomme Richard felt like losing an old friend. She had been slow. She had been old. She had been full of holes and creaky wood, but she had also been brave. She had faced impossible odds and stood tall against the mightiest navy in the world, and she had won. Captain Jones stood on the deck of the Serapis, watching the place where his ship had sunk. He didn't cry, but he felt deep sorrow. Still, he knew that the Bonhomme Richard had done her duty, and now the real work began. Taking control of the prizes with the Serapis captured, Jones turned his attention to the rest of the British convoy. Most of the merchant ships had tried to escape during the battle, but some had been caught by the American fleet. The Pallas, another American ship, had fought the Countess of Scarborough, a British warship that had tried to protect the convoy. After a long fight, the Countess had surrendered too. Now Jones had two captured British ships, the Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough, and several merchant ships under control. He had won more than just a single battle. He had struck a blow against the British economy and showed that the American Navy could strike deep into enemy waters. But holding on to these prizes would not be easy. Jones's fleet was tired. His men were hurt. Many of them had not slept in days. They needed food, water, and rest. So Jones made a decision. Sailing to neutral waters, Jones knew that if he tried to sail back to France with so many captured ships, the British Navy would try to stop him. Instead, he chose to head for neutral Dutch waters. The Dutch were not officially at war with Britain, but they often helped the Americans by letting them use their ports. Jones picked the port of Texel, near the Netherlands. It was risky, but it was the best choice. With great care, the American fleet sailed slowly toward safety. The Serapis was damaged but still seaworthy. The Pallas and Alliance guarded the captured merchant ships. Behind them, the Bonhomme Richard lay silent at the bottom of the sea, but ahead, hope remained. News travels fast. Word of the battle spread quickly. In Europe, newspapers carried the story. In France, people cheered. In America, soldiers fighting in the war heard the news and smiled. And in Britain, there was shock. How could an old American ship defeat one of Britain's finest warships? How could the mighty Royal Navy lose a battle so close to home? The British government tried to downplay the defeat, but the truth was clear. John Paul Jones had proven that the American Navy could fight, and the world was taking notice. A hero is born. When Jones finally reached the Netherlands, he and his men were treated like heroes. Dutch officials allowed the American ships to dock. Doctors came to help the wounded. Local people brought food and supplies. News of the battle reached King Louis XVI of France, who had already been helping the American cause. He was impressed. France sent money and support to help repair the Serapis and care for the wounded sailors. In America, George Washington himself praised Jones's bravery. This victory, Washington said, shows the spirit and strength of our young Navy. Soon Jones became known across Europe as the father of the American Navy. He was invited to courts and meetings. Kings and queens wanted to meet him. People wrote songs about him. But through all the praise, Jones stayed humble. He always said that the real heroes were the brave men who had fought beside him, the men who had stood on the burning decks of the Bonhomme Richard, the men who had refused to give up, the men who had believed in something bigger than themselves. A legacy that lives on years later, when peace came between America and Britain. The story of the Bonhomme Richard and the Serapis was still told. Schools taught it. Books were written about it. Sailors remembered it, because it was more than just a naval battle. It was proof that courage could beat power, that one ship, one captain, and one crew could change the course of history, and that freedom, no matter how far away, was always worth fighting for. The battle between the Bonhomme Richard and the HMS Serapis was over, but its story had only just begun. News of the fight spread across Europe and America like wildfire. In France, people cheered for John Paul Jones and his brave crew. In the United States, soldiers fighting for independence felt new hope. And in Britain, people were stunned that their mighty navy had been beaten by a single American ship. But more than just a victory, this battle became something greater. It became a symbol of courage, of bravery against impossible odds, and of one man's belief that even the smallest ship could change the world. A hero returns. After the battle, Captain John Paul Jones sailed the captured Serapis to the Netherlands. The Dutch were not at war with Britain, but they welcomed the American captain as a hero. People came from all over to see the ship that had fought so hard. They wanted to meet the men who had survived the fire, the smoke, and the blood. Jones, though tired and hurt, stood tall. He gave interviews. He met diplomats. He told the story of the Bonhomme Richard again and again. He never forgot his crew. "I did not win that battle alone," he always said. "I stood on the deck, yes, but it was the hearts of my men that carried us through. In France, King Louis XVI heard of the victory and sent messages of praise. France had already been helping the American Revolution, but now they gave even more support. Money, ships, and weapons flowed into the American cause, all because of one battle, one captain, one ship. Back home in America, when word reached the American colonies, it was like lighting a match in dry grass. Soldiers who had been fighting for years without much help suddenly felt new strength. People in towns and villages talked about the battle. They told how the Bonhomme Richard, an old broken-down ship, had taken on a powerful British fleet, how its crew had fought through fire and cannonballs, how Captain Jones had refused to surrender, even when everything seemed lost, and how, in the end, the Americans had won. George Washington, the commander of the American Army, read the news with pride. "This victory," he wrote, "shows the spirit and strength of our young Navy. If we can beat them at sea, we can beat them anywhere." In Congress, leaders used the story to ask for more help from France and Spain. They showed how the American Navy could strike deep into enemy waters, and slowly the tide of the war began to turn. The birth of a legend, John Paul Jones became a legend, not just in America, but across Europe. Kings and queens invited him to their courts. Writers wrote poems and books about him. Sailors looked up to him as a hero. But Jones didn't spend much time celebrating. He kept serving the American cause. He traveled to Paris, where he worked with Benjamin Franklin to get more ships and money for the American Navy. He trained new sailors. He planned new missions. He believed that if America was going to be free, it needed a strong navy, and he was determined to build it. What happened after? The Bonhomme Richard was gone, sunk beneath the waves, but her name lived on. Years later, other American ships would carry her name, honoring the bravery of those who sailed her. The Serapis, badly damaged in the fight, was repaired and used by the Americans for a short time before being handed over to the French. Captain Pearson, the British commander, returned to England. He was not punished for losing the Serapis. In fact, many British officers praised him for fighting hard, but the defeat hurt British pride. For the first time, the Royal Navy had lost a major battle close to home, and the message was clear. America was not just a rebellion. It was a country that could fight, and it would not go quietly. A victory that changed history, the Battle of the Bonhomme. Richard and the Serapis did not end the Revolutionary War. That would take a few more years, but it helped speed up the end, because after this battle, more countries joined the American side. Spain and the Netherlands gave more help. Even Russia and other European powers began to speak out against British rule. The battle also made the British people question the war. Why were they spending so much money? Why were so many young men dying? Could they really keep control of faraway lands? Slowly, the British public began to lose support for the war, and when that happens, no army can win. Lessons from the fight. What made the Bonhomme? Richard's victory possible? Was it better guns? Faster ships? No. It was courage. It was leadership. It was the belief that even when things look hopeless, you don't give up. John Paul Jones taught the world that. He showed that one person can make a difference. That one ship can change history. That one idea, freedom, is worth fighting for. A quiet end for a great ship today. The Bonhomme Richard lies deep beneath the ocean. Its wooden hull has long since rotted away. Its cannons are covered in sand. Its flag has turned to dust, but its story lives on. In books, in schools, in museums, and in the hearts of those who believe in freedom. Every time someone hears the words, "I have not yet begun to fight," they remember the Bonhomme Richard, and they remember the brave men who sailed her. Final thoughts. The story of the Bonhomme Richard is more than just a tale of war. It is a reminder that even the smallest among us can do great things. That courage matters more than size. That belief can move mountains, and that sometimes all it takes is one person to stand tall, say no, and fight back. John Paul Jones did that, his crew did that, and because of them, a new nation found hope. So, next time you feel like giving up, remember the Bonhomme Richard, an old, slow, broken-down ship that took on a whole fleet, and won. Would you like me to combine all 5 parts into a complete printable story? Or PDF book? Or perhaps turn it into a classroom-friendly reading packet one with questions and activities? Let me know how I can help.